So, Moleskin number 1, the assignment. My name is Peak. Yeah, I know, weird name. But you don't get to pick your name or your parents, or a lot of other things in life for that matter. It could have been worse. My parents could have named me Glacier, or Abyss, or Crampon. I'm not kidding. According to my mom, all of those names were on the list. Vincent, my literary mentor, at your school, this would be your English teacher, asked me to write this for my year-end assignment. No grades at our school. So I already can tell he goes to a different type of school, right? You can kind of tell that. When Vincent reads the sentence you just read, he'll say, "Peak, that is a run-on sentence and chaotically parenthetical." That's how he talks, meaning it's a little confusing and choppy. And I'll tell him that my life is parenthetical, and the chaos is due to the fact that I'm starting this assignment in the back of a Toyota pickup in Tibet, aka China, with an automatic pencil that doesn't have an eraser, and it's not likely that I'm going to find an eraser around here. Vincent has also said that a good writer should draw the reader in by starting in the middle of the story with a hook, and then go back and fill in what happened before the hook. Once you have the reader hooked, you can write whatever you want as you slowly reel them in. I guess Vincent thinks readers are fish. If that's the case, most of Vincent's fish have gotten away. Roland, we're on the first page of this. Actually, I'm just starting page 2 now. He's written something like 20 literary novels, all of which are out of print. So what does he mean by that? He means his
They never got published.
Yeah, or they did, but they're not popular enough to stay in print. And so he's written books, but they're not popular. If he knew what he was talking about, why do I have to search the dark, moldering aisles of used bookstores to find his books? Now I've done it. But remember this, Vincent. Writers should tell the brutal truth in their own voice and not let individuals, societies, or consequences dictate their words. And you thought no one was listening to you in class. You also know that I really like your books, or I wouldn't waste my time trying to find them. Nor would I be trying to get this story down in the back of a truck in Tibet. So he kind of does start with the hook, because he is starting in the middle of the story, because we're about to go back and learn why he's in Tibet. Speaking of which, this morning we slowed down to get around a boulder the size of a school bus that had fallen in the middle of the road. In USA, we would use dynamite or heavy equipment to move it. In Tibet, they use picks, sledgehammers, and prisoners in tattered, quilted coats to chip the boulder down to nothing. The prisoners smiled at us as we tried not to run over their shackled feet on the narrow road. Their cheerful faces were covered in nicks and cuts from the rock shrapnel. Those not chipping used crude wooden wheelbarrows to move the man-made gravel over to potholes, where very old Tibetan prisoners used battered shovels and rakes to fill in the holes. Chinese soldiers in green uniforms with rifles slung over their shoulders stood around 50-gallon burn barrels smoking cigarettes. The prisoners looked happier than the soldiers did. I wondered if the boulder would be gone by the time I came back through. I wondered if I'd ever come back through. Why do you think he'd wonder if he'd ever come back through?
Because like fun, not ever empty. It's really
Could die. It's very easy, very dangerous. You said what's a burn barrel? Usually that's something they might burn trash in or something. It's a barrel, yeah.
So maybe he could slip on the ice and like.
Yeah, you could. The hook. I was only 2/3 up the wall when the sleet started to freeze onto the black terracotta. My fingers were numb. My nose was running. I didn't have a free hand to wipe my nose, or enough rope to rappel about 500 feet to the ground. I had planned everything out so carefully, except for the weather, and now it was uh-oh time. A gust of wind tried to peel me off the wall. I dug my fingers into the seam and hugged the terracotta until it passed. I should have waited until June to make the ascent, but no, moron, has to go up in March. Why? Because everything was ready, and I have a problem with waiting. I had studied the wall, built all my custom protection, and picked the date. I was ready. And if the date passed, I might not try it at all. It doesn't take much to talk yourself out of a stunt like this. That's why there are over 6 billion people sitting safely inside homes and one... Moron, I shouted. Option 1. Finish the climb. 264 feet up, or about 100 precarious finger holds, providing my fingers didn't break off like icicles. Option 2. Climb down. A little over 500 feet, 250 finger holds. Option 3. Wait for rescue. Scratch that option. No one knew I was on the wall. By morning, providing someone actually looked up and saw me, I would be an icy gargoyle, and if I lived, my mom would drop me off the wall herself. Up it is, then. I timed my moves between vicious blasts of wind, which were becoming more frequent the higher I climbed. The sleet turned to hail, pelting me like a swarm of frozen hornets. But the worst happened about 30 feet from the top, 15 measly fingerholds away. I had stopped to give the lactic acid searing my shoulders and arms a chance to simmer down. I was mouth-breathing, partly from exertion, partly from terror, and I told myself I would make the final push as soon as I caught my breath. While I waited, a thick mist drifted in around me. The top of the wall disappeared, which was just as well. When you're tired and scared, 30 feet looks about the length of 2 football fields, and that can be pretty demoralizing. Scaling a wall happens 1 foothold and 1 handhold at a time. Thinking beyond that can weaken your resolve, and it's your will that gets you to the top as much as your muscles and climbing skills. Finally, I started breathing through my runny nose again, kind of snorting, really, but I was able to close my mouth every other breath. This is it, I told myself. 15 more handholds, and I've topped it. I reached up for the next seam and encountered a little snag. Well, a big snag, really. My right ear and cheek were frozen to the wall. To reach the top, you must have resolve, muscle, skills, and a face. Mine was anchored to that wall like a bolt, and a portion of it stayed there when I gathered enough resolve to tear it loose. Now I was mad, which was exactly what I needed to finish the climb. Cursing with every vertical lunge, I stopped about 4 feet below the edge, tempted to tag this monster with the blood running down my neck. But instead I took the mountain stencil out of my pack. Cheating, I know, but you have to have 2 free hands to do it freehand. Slapped it on the wall, and filled it in with blue spray paint. This is when the helicopter came up behind me and nearly blew me off the wall. Alright, do you guys know what he's talking about with the tag?
He marked where he can climb back down.
Well, it's a marking. He used a stencil and he spray painted it blue. So this is his marking. Have you guys ever seen like trains and they have all the graffiti and stuff on it? A lot of times graffiti artists have a tag, like something that shows that it's their work. So this is what it's like his mark to show that he was there. You are under arrest, an amplified voice shouted above the deafening rotors. I looked down. Most of the mist had been swirled away by the chopper rotors, and for the first time in about an hour, I could see the busy street 800 feet below the skyscraper. A black robe dropped down next to me, and 2 alarmed and angry faces leaned over the edge of the roof. Take the rope! I wasn't about to take the rope 4 feet away from my goal. I started up. Take the rope! When my hand reached the top of the railing, they hauled me up and cuffed my wrists behind my back. They were wearing SWAT gear and NYPD baseball caps, and there were a lot of them. So is he still in China right now?
I thought he was climbing Mount Everest.
You thought he was climbing Mount Everest right now. And what do you think he's climbing now that we know that there's SWAT and NYPD?
Skyscraper.
A skyscraper. Probably a skyscraper. One of the cops leaned close to my bloody ear. What were you thinking, he said, and then jerked me to my feet and handed me off to a regular street cop. Get this moron to emergency. A couple of stitches and the slammer. What's the slammer? Okay. When I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, I was shocked by the swarm of reporters with flashing cameras. How did they get here so quickly? He's just a kid. What's your name? He's bleeding. Why'd you do it? Did you make it to the top? I didn't answer their questions. In fact, I barely looked at them. The whole point of a spectacular tag is not the artwork, it's the mastery of how it's done. A subway rider goes by the name 17. A subway rider goes by the same 17 abandoned freight cars parked on a sidetrack week after week, year after year, and then one morning, all 17 of them have been tagged top to bottom with wild, beautiful graffiti. Or a driver in bumper-to-bumper traffic drives under the same overpass 1,000 times, barely noticing it, until the morning the entire span is painted day-glow orange and green. How'd they do that? Scaffolds? In one night? How many of them were there? Were there cops? What's the point? So this is talking about tagging, and what's the reason? The mystery. That's the point, and there isn't enough of it in my opinion. My little blue mountains were small, but I made up for their size by putting them in audacious places where they might never be seen except by a bored office worker or a window washer. This was my 6th skyscraper. I had planned to do 9 altogether. Why? I have no idea. Now everyone would know how I did it. The mystery was gone, and that was the worst part of getting caught. Or so I thought. I expected my mom to show up in the emergency room and tear off my left ear, which was still attached to my head, as was most of my cheek. The East Indian emergency doc took a look at my face and under the light for a minute or two, and then asked me what happened, eyeing the 2 cops standing in the doorway as if they were the ones who had messed me up. My face froze to a wall. You should have used lukewarm water to unfreeze it. If I'd had some handy, I would have. I'm going to clean it up and put in a couple of little stitches. I was out of there in less than an hour. The 2 cops drove me to the police station and put me in a filthy room with a 2-way mirror. I didn't look so hot. I didn't feel so good either. My head throbbed, my arms and legs ached, and I had 4 fingernails split all the way down the middle. It felt like someone had lit them on fire. The emergency doc hadn't even bothered to look at them. After what seemed like 2 days, the door opened and a tired-looking detective in a rumpled suit came in, carrying my backpack in a thick file. He dumped the contents of the pack on the table and went through everything piece by piece. When he finished, he scooped the stuff back in and then looked up at me and shook his head. "You messed up, Pete." "Peak," I said. "Like in Mountain Peak?" "Right." "Weird name. Weird parents." "Yeah, I just talked with your mother. She said I had her permission to beat you to death." Good old Mom. I got another phone call, he added. The mayor. I've been a cop for 35 years and I've never gotten a personal call from the mayor. He's upset. Turns out he was at a reception in the Woolworth building. They thought you were a terrorist, but it's pretty clear now that you're just a moron. He stared at me, waiting for a reaction. I wonder if that's going again. Yeah, I think it is. Okay. So where were we? Weird parents, good old Mom. I need to pull up a picture of the Woolworth building in a minute. So that's a kind of famous building in New York City that he was climbing. Okay, now, here we go. Let's see. He stared at me, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give him one. I was a moron. I should have checked the building's evening schedule more carefully before I scaled it. The reporters hadn't rushed over to snap photos of me. They were already there for the mayor's reception, and so were the cops. So he just became way more famous than he was expecting because he hadn't really planned out all the details, right? He didn't really want all this recognition, but then the reporters were already there. Now he's just become a big story. They'll take you over to JDC in a bit. What's JDC? I hadn't been arrested before. Juvenile Detention Center. You'll stay there until you're arraigned. I wasn't sure what that meant either, and the detective must have sensed this, because he explained that there was a separate court system for juvenile defendants. The district attorney would decide what the charges would be, and I would have to go before a judge and plead guilty or not guilty. Then they'll let me out, I said? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how much the bail is and whether your parents can cough up the dough, or Or they might deny bail altogether, which means that you'll be in JDC until your trial or sentencing date. That could be months. The courts are backed up. My mouth went dry. I haven't been in trouble before, I said. You mean you haven't been caught before? The detective opened the file folder and spread out 3 photographs on the table. We've been tracking these tags for quite a while now. Looks like we've caught the tagger red-handed. The photos were grainy, obviously taken with a long telephoto lens, but the blue stenciled mountains were clear enough. 2 uniformed cops were waiting for me outside the interrogation room, along with my mom, who was so mad she could barely speak. She looked at the bandages on my face and managed to ask if I was okay. Yeah, I'm fine. We've got to take him to JDC, ma'am, one of the cops said. Mom nodded and then looked at me. Well, we'll see what we can do, Pete, but you've really done it this time. The cops led me away. By the 3rd day at JDC, I was climbing the wall, literally, until my counselor, that's what they call the guards here, told me to stop. Spider Boy, Fly Boy, the Gecko Kid was front page news every morning. Each article dug deeper and deeper into my family's past. My mom, dad, stepfather, even my twin sisters were targets. There were infrared photos of me clinging to the skyscraper, photos from school, photos of my mom and dad when they were rock rats, and my other 2 Blue Mountain tags had been discovered. Okay, question, what do you think rock rats mean? Any ideas? Punks?
Like punks and that, like the ridiculous hair.
Okay. You're thinking like rock band kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or like bad people or something.
Like bad people? Any other ideas? Think about what this kid did and what we know that his name is and what we know that he's going to be doing during this book.
Climbers? Oh.
Climbers. I stopped reading the newspaper accounts after the 2nd day and left the common room when the news came on the television. They limited our phone calls at JDC. I was only able to catch Mom once to ask her what was going on, but she was meeting with the attorneys and didn't have time to talk. On the morning of the 4th day, my counselor came into my room, that's what they call the cells, and said I have a visitor. Finally. I was pretty disappointed to see it was Vincent in the visiting room instead of my mom. No offense, Vincent. Who was Vincent?
Probably his stepfather.
No.
Dad?
No.
His best friend.
His English teacher. Thank you, Jaden. He looked a little shocked when he saw my scabbed-over face and ear. I brought some books for you to read, he said, pushing a couple of paperbacks across the table. I imagine it gets a bit boring in here. Yeah, thanks. I also brought along a couple of moleskin notebooks. He took 2 black, shrink-wrapped notebooks out of his bag and set them on the table like they were sacred texts. They are made in Italy. Van Gogh, Picasso, Ernest Hemingway, and Bruce Chatwin drew or wrote in moleskins. Really? I guess I better tell you a little more about my school. It's a special school. In fact, it's so special it doesn't have an official name. It's simply known as Green Street School, or GSS, because that's the street it's on. There are 100 students, kindergarten through high school, from all over Manhattan. Most of the kids are prodigies, meaning they play music, sing, dance, act, solve math problems computers can't solve, and me, who can't do any of these things. I got in because of my stepfather, Rolf Young. He's on their advisory board and does all of their legal work pro bono, meaning for free. The school is 2 blocks from our loft, and my twin sisters go there too. But unlike me, they deserve to be there. They're both piano wizards. It took them a year to figure out my talent, which I think they made up so Rolf could continue to do stuff for free. Peek is our writer, the headmistress declared one day, holding up an essay I'd scrawled out that morning as I gulped down a bowl of cereal before leaving for school. I would have preferred to be their climber, but GSS doesn't recognize sports as a worthy human endeavor. Don't get me wrong, I like GSS. The students and teachers are a quirky bunch and wildly entertaining. I've even managed to learn some things there. The problem is that I don't really have any friends at the school. This isn't anyone's fault, really. My main interest is climbing, and the other students are all interested in things like number theory and what kind of gut to use on their violin or cello bows and painting techniques. Anyway, this is how I got hooked up with Vincent. As the school's English teacher, he got stuck with the job of mentoring the alleged writer. He unwrapped one of the moleskins and showed me how there was a little pocket in back to store notes, and how the elastic band stretched to mark your place, or hold the notebook closed. I brought you a pen, he said, but they would not let me give it to you. They were afraid you would write on your wall with it. I think they were probably more afraid I would use it to stab somebody, or more likely someone would take it away and stab me with it. I will see what I can do about getting you something to write with, Vincent said. He always spoke slowly, enunciating each word precisely, and I have never heard him use a contraction. Some of the best literature ever written was composed inside prison cells. I didn't plan on being at JDC long enough to compose anything. Whether you come back to school or not, you can still complete this year. I have talked to the headmistress. 4 other authors and I will evaluate you by the words you put in the notebook. Evaluate meant graduate at GSS. I brought you 2 moleskins in case you write a longer piece. It must be a story, not a diary or a journal, with a beginning, middle, and a denouement at the end to tie the story together. The story can be based on your life, someone else's life, or events completely from your imagination. You only have to complete one of the moleskins to fulfill your requirement, using some of the writing techniques I have taught you during the past year. I'm coming back to school, I said. He didn't look like he believed me. Regardless, he said, the assignment will remain the same. Later that morning I had a second visitor, a woman, long brown hair, pale blue eyes, olive-colored skin, carrying a garment bag. She was short but powerfully built, with good muscle tone in her arms. Aside from a slight stiffness in her back, which you'd have to know her to notice, the only flaw she had were her hands. They were scarred from years of climbing. Sorry I couldn't get out here sooner, Mom said, with the twins and the attorneys. And that's okay, I interrupted. JDC was at least an hour and a half drive from our loft in Manhattan. In addition to everything else, Mom worked full-time at a bookstore she and her friend owned. Still, I would have liked to have seen her before this. She walked over to where I was sitting and looked at the scabs on my face. Ugly, she said. Thanks. She started pacing. How are the twins? They haven't stopped crying since you got busted. I winced. It was one thing to upset my mom, but I didn't like upsetting Patrice and Paula. 2 peas in a pod, as Mom and Rolf called them, or pee-pee, as I called them, which always made them giggle. They were 6 years old and looked up to the third P, me, like I was a god. You've really done it this time, Peak. 6 skyscrapers. They're going to eat you up and spit you out. Rolf has cashed in for every favor he has in the city, but I don't think any of it is going to work. He got your arraignment delayed and tried for a second delay. I had seen my mom agitated before, but I had never seen her like this. She was pacing the small holding cell like a caged leopard. Whoa. Hoping that the publicity would die down, but after last night, that's all down the tube. The district attorney, who Rolf went to school with, and the judge nixed that idea. Wait, I said. What happened last night? She stopped pacing and glared at me with her mouth open and her eyes wide. You didn't hear? Oh, I shook my head. I forgot about this part. A boy fell from the Flatiron building. He's dead. I stared at her. What does that have to do with you? She yelled. It's because of you, Peak. The boy had all your news articles. Dang it.